the $2,000 tariff dividend announcement, and the economic landscape. Welcome to our special in-depth analysis of the breaking economic developments shaking the nation this Sunday, November 9th, 2025. In a move that has sent shockwaves through both financial markets and everyday households, President Donald Trump has officially announced a proposal for $2,000 dividend checks to be distributed to most Americans. This tariff dividend, as the administration is calling it, represents a direct redistribution of the billions of dollars collected through the aggressive trade policies that have characterized the current administration. Trump's announcement comes at a critical juncture as the United States navigates its longest government shutdown in history, a period of intense political friction and economic tension. The president took to Truth Social to break the news, asserting that the country is now the richest and most respected it has ever been, citing a record-breaking stock market and all-time high 401k balances. According to the president's post, the dividend of at least $2,000 a person will be paid to everyone, notably excluding high-income individuals. Trump framed the move as a direct result of successful tariff implementation, stating that those who oppose such duties are fools. While the specific income threshold for high-income exclusions remains to be detailed, the message is clear. The administration intends to leverage trade revenue as a direct benefit for the American people. As we examine this announcement, we will look at the legal hurdles, the legislative requirements, and the impact on a national debt that has reached $37 trillion. The power of the purse, a constitutional clash. As the announcement of a $2,000 tariff dividend circulates through the headlines on this Sunday, November 9th, 2025, it immediately faces a significant legal hurdle: the United States Constitution. Under American law, the power of the purse resides strictly with Congress, meaning the executive branch cannot unilaterally authorize the spending of federal funds. This raises immediate questions about whether President Trump has the authority to issue these checks without a formal bill passed by the House and Senate. While the president presents this as a direct payout from tariff revenue, legal experts are quick to point out that even dividends derived from tax revenue typically require legislative approval. This proposal is not entirely without precedent in the halls of Congress. Earlier this summer, Republican Senator Josh Hawley introduced similar legislation aimed at providing $600 tariff rebates to hardworking Americans and their dependent children. Hawley's bill was designed to allow citizens to benefit directly from the wealth that tariffs are returning to the country. However, the president's plan is far more ambitious in its scope and dollar amount. If the administration attempts to bypass the legislative process through executive action, it will likely trigger an immediate constitutional showdown. For the millions of Americans hopeful for this relief, the central question remains whether this $2,000 check is a guaranteed payment or merely an opening move in a high-stakes power struggle between the White House and the Capitol. The economic miracle? Trump's vision of a tariff-driven U.S. In his recent statements, President Trump has articulated a vision of an America that has reached unprecedented heights of wealth and respect due to his trade policies. He claims the nation is currently experiencing almost no inflation while witnessing record-breaking performance in the stock market and 401k balances. From the president's perspective, the trillions of dollars being taken in through tariffs will soon allow the government to begin paying down the massive $37 trillion national debt. He points to a record investment in the U.S. and with plants and factories supposedly appearing across the country as a direct result of these protective duties. The proposed $2,000 dividend is framed as a reward to the American people for this perceived economic success. Trump has explicitly stated that those who oppose tariffs are fools, doubling down on his America First strategy despite ongoing international tensions with trading partners like China, Canada, Mexico, and the EU. By branding the payment as a dividend rather than a traditional stimulus check, the administration is attempting to shift the narrative from government assistance to a share of national profit generated by foreign trade. This bold economic stance suggests a fundamental shift in U.S. fiscal policy, where trade barriers become a primary driver of domestic financial benefits for the average citizen. The revenue reality: can tariffs pay for the dividend? While the president speaks of trillions in revenue, official data from the Treasury Department provides a more grounded perspective on the actual collections. According to reports from September 2025, The U.S. has collected approximately $214 billion in tariff revenue throughout the first 3 quarters of the year. In the month of September alone, collections reached $31.3 billion. While these are record-breaking figures for the Treasury, they raise a significant mathematical challenge for the proposed $2,000 payout. To provide a $2,000 check to most Americans, excluding only high-income individuals, the government would likely need between $500 billion and $600 billion in total funding. Currently, the revenue collected for the entire year is less than half of what would be required for a universal $2,000 distribution. Furthermore, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent had previously indicated that the administration's top priority for this revenue was to address the $38 trillion national debt. This creates a clear internal tension within the administration's fiscal strategy. Do they use the tariff war chest to reduce the deficit as originally planned, or do they pivot to direct cash injections for the public? If the president insists on the $2,000 figure, the Treasury may be forced to find additional funding sources or hope that tariff collections accelerate at an even more dramatic pace in the coming months. The Supreme Court factor. A looming legal test. The announcement of the $2,000 dividend arrives just as the administration's trade policy faces its most critical legal test before the Supreme Court. Last week, the High Court heard arguments regarding whether the president's use of emergency laws to impose broad tariffs on almost every country is legally valid. Challengers argue that the administration is overstepping its authority, claiming that these duties act more like an unauthorized revenue-raising tax than a legitimate solution to trade imbalances. Several justices have expressed skepticism, appearing concerned about the nearly limitless tariff power being claimed by the executive branch. The stakes of this case are incredibly high for the proposed dividend. If the Supreme Court rules that the tariffs were not legally imposed, the government could be forced to refund over $100 billion to importers. Such a ruling would not only eliminate the funding source for the $2,000 checks, but also create a massive hole in the federal budget. President Trump has been vocal in his criticism of the court's skeptical stance, reinforcing his position that without tariffs, his economic vision cannot be realized. For the millions of Americans watching these developments, the court's upcoming decision will determine if the tariff revenue is truly the government's to give away. Scott Bessent's walk back, checks versus tax cuts. A major point of confusion emerged on Sunday when Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent appeared to offer a different interpretation of the president's $2,000 promise. In an interview with ABC News, Bessent admitted he had not yet spoken with the president specifically about the plan for $2,000 physical checks. Instead, he suggested that the dividend might arrive in the form of tax decreases that are already part of the administration's legislative agenda. He pointed to proposed measures such as no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, and the elimination of taxes on Social Security benefits as the primary delivery mechanisms. Bessent also mentioned the deductibility of auto loans as a substantial way the tax bill would put money back into people's pockets. To many analysts, this sounded like a walk back of the president's bold stimulus promise. If the $2,000 is merely the cumulative value of various tax deductions over a year, it would be a far cry from the immediate one-time cash injection many low-income Americans are expecting. This apparent disconnect between the president's social media announcement and the Treasury Secretary's more cautious policy-oriented explanation suggests that the final form of the dividend is still very much a matter of internal debate. Defining low income. Who is actually eligible? One of the most pressing questions for the public is who will actually qualify for the $2,000 dividend. President Trump has been clear that the payout will be made to everyone, but will specifically exclude high-income people. However, he has yet to provide the specific dollar threshold for this exclusion. In previous discussions throughout the year, there were mentions of a possible salary cap of $100,000 per year, though this has not been officially confirmed in the most recent announcement. The goal, according to the administration, is to ensure the relief reaches those who have been most affected by the current economic environment. The inclusion of Social Security recipients is also a significant focal point. By proposing to eliminate taxes on Social Security benefits, the administration is signaling that seniors are a priority. However, there is a distinct difference between a tax deduction and a direct $2,000 check, especially for those whose income is already too low to face significant tax liability. As the administration refines the everyone but the rich policy, millions of middle-class households are waiting to see if they fall above or below the yet-to-be-defined cutoff line. The lack of detail regarding eligibility remains a major hurdle for those trying to calculate the true impact of this proposal. The 50-year mortgage, a game changer for housing. In a separate but equally disruptive proposal, President Trump is considering a radical shift in the housing market, the introduction of 50-year mortgages. Currently, the 30-year mortgage is the American standard, a tradition that dates back to the FHA and the New Deal era of 1949. However, with 93% of Americans stating that housing costs are currently too high, the administration is looking for new weapons to address the affordability crisis. Federal Housing Finance Agency Director Bill P.E. confirmed that the administration is laser-focused on this 50-year plan, calling it a potential game changer for young people and first-time buyers. The logic behind the move is to lower monthly mortgage payments by stretching the loan over 5 decades instead of 3. For example, on a $200,000 home with a 20% down payment, a homeowner might pay $1,143 a month on a 50-year mortgage compared to $1,257 on a 30-year term. While a savings of roughly $114 a month might make the American dream more accessible in the short term, it also means that homeowners will be carrying debt for most of their lives. This proposal highlights a desperate attempt to find solutions in a market where the typical age of a first-time buyer has risen to a record high of 40 years old. Debt slaves for life. The critique of the 50-year loan. The 50-year mortgage proposal has immediately split opinion among lawmakers and economic experts. While some, like Open Door CEO Cass Neaton, call it the most pro-homeowner policy in decades, others are sounding a loud alarm. Georgia Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene voiced strong opposition, arguing that the plan would ultimately reward the banks, mortgage lenders, and home builders while leaving citizens forever in debt. Critics fear that homeowners would pay far more in interest over time and might even die before ever paying off their homes. Economic analysts note that under a 50-year structure, a family might still only own about 20% of their house after 30 years of payments. This has led to accusations from figures like Maggie Anderson that the policy would turn young Americans into debt slaves for the rest of their lives. Some suggest that instead of extending the length of loans, the government should focus on increasing the housing supply through deregulation to lower actual prices. Congressman Thomas Massey even compared the proposal to the infamous phrase, "You will own nothing and you will like it." For the administration, the challenge is proving that this isn't just a way to mask high prices with longer debt. The SNAP crisis, 65% benefits, and the clawback. While the $2,000 dividend offers a promise of future relief, a much more immediate crisis is unfolding for the 42 million Americans who rely on food aid. The Trump administration has ordered states to stop paying full SNAP benefits, stating that the full amounts are currently unauthorized due to the ongoing government shutdown. The USDA has directed states to deliver only 65% of the benefits and has even asked states to claw back any full funds that were already distributed for the month of November. This decision followed an emergency order from the Supreme Court that allowed the administration to withhold roughly $4 billion in funding while legal appeals continue. For a family of 4, which typically receives about $715 a month, this 35% cut leaves them with less than $6 per day per person for food. The administration's stance is that they must hold the line on spending until Congress reaches a budget agreement and gets their act together. This has placed low-income families in the crossfire of the longest government shutdown in U.S. history, creating a stark contrast between the talk of tariff dividends and the current reality of reduced food assistance. State defiance, the battle over food, stamps. The order to claw back food aid has met with fierce resistance from several governors who are refusing to comply with the USDA's directive. States like New York, Massachusetts, California, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania had already begun paying out full benefits following a lower court order, and they are not backing down easily. Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers responded to the federal request to return the benefits with a simple no. Meanwhile, Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey stated that she would see the president in court, arguing that penalizing states for preventing Americans from going hungry is unacceptable. The federal government has warned that if states do not comply and return to the 65% threshold, the USDA may cancel funding for state administrative costs or hold the states liable for any over-issuance of funds. This sets up a dangerous legal and financial game of chicken between the federal government and state leaders. While the administration blames the Schumer shutdown for the lack of funds, states argue that the money has already reached recipients and cannot be retrieved. This saga is leaving millions of SNAP recipients unsure if they will have enough money to put food on the table for the remainder of the month. The shutdown context: politics versus payouts. All of these developments, the $2,000 dividend, the 50-year mortgage, and the SNAP cuts, are taking place against the backdrop of an unprecedented government shutdown. President Trump is using these proposals as leverage, signaling that he is holding strong and will not give in to the Democrats until the budget is resolved on his terms. By announcing a $2,000 dividend at the same time he halts full food aid, the president is sending a complex message. He wants to reward the people with new wealth from tariffs, but he will not continue unauthorized spending from the old budget. The political strategy appears to be framing the shutdown as the fault of congressional Democrats, the so-called Schumer shutdown, while positioning Trump as the one offering innovative financial solutions. However, the human cost of this stalemate is rising daily. Beyond the cuts to food aid, the shutdown is reportedly causing major delays for people flying around the nation. For many Americans, the promise of a $2,000 check feels distant when current essential benefits are being slashed and the government is at a total standstill. The coming weeks will determine if this aggressive stance leads to a breakthrough or a deepening national crisis. Summary and final analysis: a high-stakes gamble. As we conclude this analysis of the breaking news from November 9th, 2025, it is clear that the American economy is at a historic crossroads. President Trump's announcement of a $2,000 tariff dividend is a bold attempt to redefine the relationship between trade policy and the average citizen's bank account. By promising to share the billions collected from foreign trade partners, the administration is making a populist play that bypasses traditional congressional gridlock. Yet with a skeptical Supreme Court and a Treasury Secretary who points toward tax cuts rather than cash checks, the path to those $2,000 payments is filled with obstacles. At the same time, the proposal for 50-year mortgages and the dramatic cuts to SNAP benefits show an administration willing to break decades of precedent to achieve its broader fiscal goals. Whether these moves are viewed as a game changer for affordability or a trap that creates debt slaves for life, their impact on the national conversation is undeniable. For low-income Americans and seniors, the message is one of mixed signals: the promise of future wealth versus the immediate reality of a shutdown and reduced aid. As the nation waits for the Supreme Court's ruling and a potential budget resolution, the Trump administration is doubling down on its America First strategy, and the entire world is watching to see if this high-stakes gamble pays off.